Ancient theatres were built as a semicircle, and the word amphitheatre means theatre on both sides. About 230 amphitheatres were built across the territory of the Roman Empire, and the largest one ever built is also one of the world's greatest works of architecture and engineering. It is the Flavian Amphitheatre, now known as the Colosseum, and its story begins with a fire. The Great Fire of Rome broke out on the windy night of July the 19th, 64 AD. It raged for 6 days before being brought under control, but soon reignited and burned for another 3 days. Of Rome's 14 districts, only 4 escaped unharmed. Immediately after the fire was extinguished, a new city plan was drawn up, in which almost a third of the city belonging to the people was seized by the emperor for himself. He ordered a vast palace to be built, Domus Aurea, the Golden House, forcing many people to emigrate to other nearby cities. Nero had loved arts since childhood, and at first he also proved to be a capable emperor. Over time, however, his reign transformed into tyranny, and when he fulfilled his life's dream and performed publicly as an actor, he turned the conservative aristocratic classes against himself. These classes opposed theatre and art competitions as foreign entertainment, destroying Roman manners. He was declared a public enemy by the Senate, and the cornered Nero took his own life. After his death, 4 emperors traded places on the throne over a period of 18 months. For 7 months, the cruel and avaricious Galba ruled. This old man soon became wildly unpopular and was killed by the Praetorian Guard. The organizer of his murder, Otto, ruled for 3 months. He committed suicide after his forces were defeated. Prodigal Vitellius ruled for 8 months. He was executed by soldiers of rebellious legions who had elected their own emperor in the east of the empire and marched on Rome. They chose an experienced and respected general, Titus Flavius Vespasianus, or simply Vespasian, who at that time was suppressing a revolt in Judea. However, after the confusion arising from civil wars, he could not expect a warm welcome in Rome. Therefore, he postponed his journey to Rome for 10 months and urged his son Titus to conquer Jerusalem. The utter defeat of the Jews was to adorn Vespasian with the halo of the victorious leader, thanks to which he could defend his seizure of power. During the destruction of Jerusalem, the so-called Second Temple was also destroyed, yielding opulent spoils of war. It is the year 70 AD, and Vespasian triumphantly enters Rome. 2 years later, funded from his general share of the booty, building works started. On the site that Nero confiscated after the Great Fire, he builds a pleasure palace for the people. Placed at the heart of Rome, the Colosseum becomes its symbol. Rome's imperial regime was restored. After the Great Fire razed this originally densely inhabited area, Nero built his grandiose Domus Aurea on this site. It was a complex of lavish buildings and gardens with an artificial lake and a 30-meter-high bronze statue of himself, which was set up at the entrance to the palace, the Colossus of Nero. Vespasian preserved the Colossus, but the lake was filled in and the land reused as the location for the new amphitheatre. Over time, much of the Domus Aurea was buried or torn down. The Colosseum is built of blocks of travertine stone from a quarry 25 kilometers away, along with volcanic rock, bricks and concrete. It forms an oval 527 meters in circumference. Besides slaves, teams of professional builders, engineers, painters and decorators also worked on the construction. Its building took 8 years to complete, and the successor and heir to the throne, Titus, held inaugural games lasting nearly 100 days. The Roman historian Cassius Dio recounts that over 9,000 wild animals were slain and a mock naval battle involving 3,000 men was enacted. Such spectacular shows were infrequent in the monument's history, and not all emperors were enthusiastic for these spectacles. Some celebrated their succession to the throne, their predecessors, birthdays, or victory over a foreign enemy. The name Colosseum for the amphitheatre dates from the 6th century. Nero's successors remodeled his statue into the likeness of the sun god Sol by adding the appropriate solar crown and name, Colossus Solis. Some of the emperors also altered the statue's face to make it resemble themselves. One of them, Hadrian, moved the giant sculpture using 24 elephants to its position beside the amphitheatre, where it stood well into the medieval era and was credited with magical powers. It became an iconic symbol of the permanence of Rome. Are you afraid of heights? At the start of the Colosseum's construction, drainage ditches were dug that were 8 meters deep, and one of the reasons the building still stands today are its foundations that go 13 meters deep. The outer wall's facade comprises 3 stories of open archways, framed by half columns of the Tuscan, Ionic, and Corinthian orders, while the attic is decorated by Corinthian pilasters and small windows, between which are bronze shields. The total height is 48 meters. Each arch of the first and second floor frames a statue honoring athletes, divinities, and other mythological figures. From the decorations found in the tomb of a family of builders who participated in the construction of the Colosseum, we know that, at least in the early years, there were eagles on the second floor, which were later replaced with figures. At the top are 240 corbels with sockets for wooden masts to support a retractable awning known as the velarium. This was to shade the audience from the heat of the sun and covers 2/3 of the arena. The immediate vicinity of the stadium features a complete support infrastructure. To the east are training schools for gladiators. Ludus Magnus, the large school connected to the Colosseum by an underground passage, Ludus Matutinus, the morning school where animals and their hunters were trained, plus the Dacian and Gallic schools. Nearby is an armory to keep weapons out of the hands of gladiators unless necessary, and a store for props and various machinery. Wounded gladiators were treated in the sanitarium, and there is also a military camp where sailors specially enlisted from the Roman fleet to work the velarium were stationed. Also stables for keeping all sorts of animals. On the buried ruins of Domus Aurea were built the Baths of Trajan, and in front of you stands Colossus Solis and the Temple of Venus and Rome. A triumphal arch dedicated to the Emperor Constantine the Great to commemorate the victory at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. The 17-meter-high marble fountain Metasudans, or the Sweating Post, around which a triumphal procession would turn from the Via Triumphalis onto the Via Sacra and into the Forum Romanum itself. Around the perimeter of the Colosseum was a series of tall stone posts, with 5 still surviving today. These played a role in controlling access to the building. Spectators are given tickets in the form of tokens of wood, bone, or lead, on which is written the entrance, level, and row number. They access their seats via circular corridors, numbered staircases, and vomitoria, passageways that open into a tier of seats. These quickly disperse huge crowds of people into their seats and permit their exit within only a few minutes. Corridors also offer a variety of amenities, including drinking water fountains. There are 80 entrances at ground level, 76 of them for ordinary spectators. The two on the long side of the building are for the performers. The northern and southern entrances, topped with a 4-horse chariot, are reserved for the elite and the emperor. All 4 axial entrances are richly decorated with painted stucco reliefs and brightly painted plaster. The typical sequence of displays during the day is as follows. In the morning are the wild animal hunts. They fight each other or are pitted against trained hunters. Utilized is a great variety of beasts such as rhinos, elephants, lions, crocodiles, deer, ostriches, and many more. Battles and hunts are often staged in recreations of natural scenes with buildings, bushes, and real trees. At midday are executions, either in varieties of ingenious slaughter and torture or in the form of reenacting a story from mythology. For example, the myth of Orpheus was played, the magician who could charm animals. The Orpheus figure in this display works no such magic. He was torn apart by a bear. During intermissions, acrobats and magicians would perform. In the afternoon, the gladiatorial bouts begin. They usually fight one-on-one, with trainers and referees on hand to supervise the match. Victors may win fame, fortune, or freedom. Are you an emperor or a Vestal Virgin? The entire complex is designed to keep citizens of different status rigidly separated. Senators, and behind them the next noble class, knights. The next level is divided into 2 sections, lower for the wealthy and upper for the poor citizens. Specific sectors are provided for boys with their tutors, soldiers on leave, foreign dignitaries, priests, and so on. All those sectors have marble rows. Above them is a section with stone rows, and at topmost level with wooden benches, reserved for non-citizens, slaves, and women, apart from the state priestesses known as the Vestal Virgins, who sit in front with the senators. The space allocated to an average spectator is only 40 centimetres, with legroom of 70 centimetres, although this for sure doesn't apply to the senators. Some groups are banned altogether from the Colosseum, notably gravediggers, actors, and former gladiators. Special boxes at the north and south ends are for the emperor and the other highest officials of the empire. The emperor also has a private tunnel which permits him to enter and exit the Colosseum without the need to pass through the crowds. The arena itself is an oval 84 by 50 meters, surrounded by a wall 5 meters high. A latticework probably surrounded the senatorial podium, and there was an additional fence with a net in the arena, designed to keep the animals away from the spectators. However, on a few occasions, even those barriers weren't enough. A wooden floor covered by sand was built over an elaborate structure called the hypogeum, meaning underground. The Latin word for sand is harina. The underground corridors are not part of the original structure, but were built for Emperor Domitian when it was decided it would no longer be flooded for simulated naval battles. There are 80 hoists to bring animals and scenery pieces to the surface. It is a hive of sweating slave labor, skilled stagehands, chained criminals, caged animals and their trainers and hunters, all lit just by oil lamps and torches. It is also connected by tunnels to several points outside the building, allowing cages and performers to be brought in. Gladiators or swordsmen are exclusively men, outsiders in Roman society. Some of them are captives of war, slaves and condemned men. Others are the poor and destitute who seek hope and fame in possible success. When a free-born citizen becomes a gladiator, he falls into official disgrace, the same category as prostitutes and actors. The gladiators take their oath upon first entering gladiator school. He vows to endure, to be burnt, to be chained up, to be beaten, and to be killed by the sword. From ancient records, we can deduce the following average numbers. A gladiator has 2 fights a year. The death rate is about 1 in 6 in each show. 3/4 of all gladiators die before their 10th fight, and just a handful of veterans survive 50 fights. Over the centuries, there existed about 25 different types of gladiator. Here stand probably the 4 most important. The retiarius, or the net fighter, carrying a trident and a net, styled as a fisherman. He wears a larger arm guard and a wide belt, holding his loincloth and a dagger. With the retiarius is usually fighting the secutor, or the pursuer, armed with a gladius sword, scutum shield, arm and shin guard, leather belt and a helmet which covered the entire face to protect it against the opponent's trident. The helmet is round and smooth so that the retiarius could not get a grip on it with his net. The murmillo, wearing the same armor and weapons as a secutor but with a different, larger type of helmet. The thraex, armed in the Thracian style. He carries a small rectangular or circular shield and a short sword with a curved blade. He has an arm guard, decorated shin guards and belt, and a large helmet. The average weight of the helmets is about 4 kilograms, the heaviest coming in at almost 7. They are often embossed with figures of barbarians paying homage to the goddess Roma, the personification of the city. Other types of gladiators were, for example, the provocator, or challenger, the hoplomachus with his Greek equipment, the Samnite, resembling tribes defeated by Rome in the 3rd century BC, and so on. A defeated gladiator, if still alive, is at the mercy of the audience and the sponsor of the games. When missio is refused, he is put to death by his opponent. To die well, a gladiator should never ask for mercy nor cry out. A good death redeems the gladiator from the dishonorable weakness and passivity of defeat and provides a noble example to those who watch. The shows are demonstrations of power of Rome over the conquered lands, a sign of family prestige, but also have a strong religious element and are a kind of sacred ritual of self-sacrifice to Rome. The biggest bloodbath ever recorded was organized by the Emperor Trajan to celebrate his conquest of Dacia. The games took place over 123 days. 11,000 animals were killed and 10,000 gladiators battled. But such games were not held as one continuous block. First came 2 years of preliminary games with 12-day blocks. Then came the main games lasting 1.5 years, involving 5,000 gladiators. This game plan shows that on average, the Colosseum was used 1 out of every 5 days. What went on, if anything, in the monument during the years of less frequent use, nobody knows. Thanks to a 4th century calendar, we know that out of 176 holidays, only 10 days were devoted to gladiator games, and that the Colosseum could accommodate 87,000 people. It's worth remembering that, as with Christmas, frequency is not a good guide to cultural importance. Also, modern estimates put the capacity at around 50,000 spectators. Do you want to experience what it was like here when it was full of spectators? In the 3rd century, the Colosseum was badly damaged by a fire caused by lightning. It was not fully repaired for 30 years. The practice of gladiator fights was banned at the beginning of the 5th century, and the last mention of fights dates from around 435 AD. In the end, it was not so much legislation that put a stop to the bloody spectacles, but rather repeated civil wars and barbarian invasions that limited the capacity of the state and individuals to sponsor games, to procure wild animals, and to maintain the costly infrastructure of training camps. In late antiquity, the capital city was moved to Ravenna. The population of the city of Rome declined, as did the empire. The last recorded animal hunts took place in 523 AD, when Anicius Maximus celebrated his consulship and Rome was already under the rule of the Ostrogoths. Their king, Theodoric the Great, criticized the games for their high cost, even though they were still extremely popular. By the late 6th century, a small chapel had been built into the structure of the amphitheatre. The arena was converted into a cemetery, and spaces in the arcades were rebuilt into housing and workshops. Around the year 1200, part of the Colosseum was even fortified. Severe damage was inflicted on the building by the Great Earthquake in 1349, causing the outer south side, built on less stable terrain, to collapse. An earthquake is coming. Do you want to survive it here, or do you want to leave the building? The amphitheatre was turned into a quarry. Tumbled and interior stone was reused elsewhere, and decorative marble elements were ripped out and burned to make quicklime. In the mid-15th century, one Italian scholar ruefully recalls that most of the Colosseum had been turned into lime. Those little holes all over the building are where enterprising medieval hucksters hacked out 300 tons of iron clamps which held the blocks together. Dismantling of the building began to slow down by the end of the 16th century, and restoration work started in the 18th century. With growing pressure to investigate the ancient history of the monument, and the establishment of the new Italian state, the Colosseum was proclaimed a state monument and an archaeological site in the 1870s. The new authorities' first act was to remove what they called weeds. We don't know why, perhaps due to the special microclimate within the walls, or that seeds fell out of the fur of the exotic animals, but a total number of 418 various plants were identified at the site, including some extraordinary rarities which had thrived for centuries in the building's ruins. We know very little about those who designed the amphitheatre, but thanks to them and to its preservation, it became a model of all large modern stadiums and a symbol of Rome. Most Romans and their bloodthirsty culture did not approve of the shows, but later Christians saw in them the cruelty of Roman paganism, to which they were so strongly opposed. And what do you think of the Colosseum and all it represents?